When I told my mom that my savings had finally reached $400,000 in the safe, she disappeared. The next morning, along with the entire safe, leaving behind a note that said, "I've invested too much money in you, so I have the right to take it back." I laughed because honestly inside the safe was. I never thought I'd receive a fraud alert message from the very person who gave birth to me. It all started on what seemed like a perfectly normal morning until I saw my bank balance had dropped to exactly 4 zeros. Not a system error. Not some random thief. The only person who could have done this was my mother. She had stolen everything I'd saved over nearly 10 years and vanished like she never existed. But what truly knocked the air out of my lungs was the letter she left on the kitchen table. Handwritten in that all-too-familiar script. So neat, so fake it made my skin crawl. "My name is Evelyn Scott, 31 years old, a financial analyst in Boston. Numbers have always been my safe world. Logical, honest, and never betraying. Unlike people." That morning I was working at my little kitchen nook, coffee long since gone cold. My phone kept buzzing, but I barely glanced at it. "Unusual activity on your account," said a notification from the bank. I swiped past it, thinking I'd check later. A deadly mistake. Then I saw it. A payment invoice in my email from a 5-star hotel in Miami. A place I'd never even been. My heart slammed like someone had punched me in the chest. I immediately opened my banking app. My eyes locked onto the screen, refusing to believe what they were seeing. $0. Checking account, $0. Savings, $0. Emergency fund, also $0. Every last cent, $325,000 saved over nearly a decade. Gone like vapor. I shot up from my chair, heart pounding, hands shaking as I frantically scrolled through recent transactions. First-class airfare, luxury shopping, Michelin-star restaurants, spas, hotel chains. Not mine. Couldn't be mine. And then I saw the first familiar name. Susan Scott. My mother. In that moment, part of me wanted to scream. Another part just wanted to collapse. We hadn't lived together since I was 19. The relationship was never great, but lately, I'd started to open up again. After her minor stroke, I lent her a key to my apartment. I even gave her my safe's pin, thinking she might need some emergency cash. Stupid. I was so stupid. I called her 3 times. 4. Straight to voicemail every time. Taking a deep breath, I grabbed my coat and drove like a zombie. Her apartment was about 30 minutes away. I drove like I could still salvage something. An explanation. A sign I'd misunderstood. But no. The door was locked from the outside. I called out. No answer. The mailbox. Empty. And then I saw it. A folded envelope placed neatly on the kitchen table like she wanted me to find it. I recognized the handwriting instantly. That slanted, old-fashioned script she always used for Christmas cards. Every letter rounded. Ceremonial. Like a prayer. But now it just made me sick. My dearest Evelyn. By the time you read this, I'm probably halfway across the world. I'm sorry. I needed a new beginning. A second chance to live the way I've always wanted. I hope one day you'll understand. Love, Ma. I clenched the letter so hard the paper crumpled in my palm. Understand? She emptied my life savings. Disappeared. And left behind a flowery note like this with some cheap paperback novel? I screamed. A raw throat-tearing scream. The cold apartment stayed silent, save for the quiet whirring of the ceiling fan, mocking me. If it had been a stranger, I might have been able to forgive. But this was my mother. I was still shaking with rage and humiliation when my phone rang. Unknown number. Normally, I'd let it go to voicemail, but at that point, I was drained with nothing left to lose. Hello? Is this Miss Evelyn Scott? A man's voice. Slow, formal. Yes. This is she. Who's calling? My voice was still hoarse from the screaming. I'm Richard Keller, the private attorney of Mrs. Vivian Maddock, your grandmother. I'm very sorry to inform you that she passed away last week in Phoenix. We've been trying to reach you several times without success. I stood frozen in the kitchen. The room seemed to shrink around me. My grandmother passed away? I whispered, as if saying it out loud would make it hurt more. Vivian was the only light in my childhood, the only woman who ever dared to stand up to my mother, Susan. She was the one who helped me pay for my first year of college, when my mother told me to forget school and get a job. I couldn't even make out what Mr. Keller said next. Everything echoed like it was coming from far away. Will assets. Meeting at the office in Scottsdale. I hung up the phone, barely remembering how the call ended. I collapsed into a chair. She was gone. My mother had cleaned me out and disappeared. And me? I was just a fool with $0 in my bank account and an empty safe. 2 days later, I showed up at the law office in downtown Scottsdale, Arizona. The room was quiet, elegant, but not flashy. On the desk sat a carefully arranged stack of documents. Richard Keller looked to be in his early 50s, tall, with a serious face that wasn't unkind. He stood up and shook my hand with both of his, something I rarely saw from people in his profession. Miss Evelyn, my deepest condolences. Vivian wasn't just a client, she was a friend. I swallowed hard and nodded. I still can't believe it. I understand. But there are some matters we need to go over. Mrs. Vivian's will was written 3 years ago and last updated just 3 months before she passed. Mr. Keller pulled a cream-colored folder from the drawer and slid it across the desk toward me. I'll be direct. Mrs. Vivian left her entire estate to you. I blinked. All of it? All of it, including the Maddox Inn chain in Arizona and New Mexico, currently valued at around $10,500,000. There's also real estate in Sedona, a house in Flagstaff, and a personal investment portfolio worth over $1,700,000. I was nearly numb. What about my mother? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Mr. Keller's face hardened slightly as he flipped to a page in the file and read slowly. Susan Scott, my daughter, has had more than enough chances and has made her own choices. I am leaving her no part of my estate. She's taken more than enough. I let out a laugh, not because anything was funny, but because I didn't know how else to react. She knew. She always knew who my mother really was. Mr. Keller nodded, then pulled an old leather-bound journal from the drawer, tied with a small red string. Vivian said you should read this alone. She called it her final gift. I took the journal in my hands, fingers trembling with emotion. The scent of old paper mixed with lavender, the perfume my grandmother always wore, tightened my throat. I turned to the first marked page. My Evelyn, if you're holding this journal, it means I'm gone. But I believe people never truly leave as long as they're remembered. You were always the best thing this family had, even if your mother never saw it. I covered my mouth to hold back a sob. What I've left you isn't just money. It's freedom. The power to escape the cycle your mother used to keep you in her grip. Use it wisely. And remember, sometimes, the best way to deal with a con artist is to let them think they're winning. I closed the journal, my heart pounding loudly in my chest. My mother didn't know about any of this, but she would, soon. I had just set down Vivian's journal when my phone buzzed again. Richard Keller's law office? I frowned and picked up. I'm Scott. Sorry to bother you, but I thought you should know. Mr. Keller's voice dropped. Your mother contacted our office 3 days ago. She called from Thailand. She requested a copy of the will and threatened to sue if she was excluded from the inheritance. I closed my eyes and let out a bitter laugh. Of course, Susan Scott was always like that. She treated everything as if it was rightfully hers, whether she earned it or not, and when it was taken away, she clawed like a wounded animal. Did you send her anything? I asked, my voice cold as ice. Absolutely not. Vivian made it clear all documents are to be shared with you only, but I believe she's found out something. It seems someone in our office may have leaked information. I hung up, my hands clenched so tightly they turned white. My blood boiled, not from rage, but adrenaline. I glanced at my grandmother's journal on the table. The page she marked was still open. Remember, Evelyn, the best way to deal with a snake is to let it crawl into the trap it thinks it controls. I sank deeper into the chair, eyes fixed on that line. The numbness from last week had faded. Now there was only a plan taking shape, step by step. 2 days later, I met with Tiffany, my best friend since high school. She worked in PR in Austin. Smart, sharp, and absolutely allergic to injustice. When I finished telling her everything, she just shrugged. So you want to trap her? No. I want her to trap herself, I said evenly. She wants to think I'm soft, that I'll split the inheritance. Fine, we'll give her a reason to come back. Tiffany squinted, grinning slightly. Evelyn, I like this version of you way better than college. I called Devin, an old friend who used to be a cybersecurity analyst in San Diego. Now, a freelance expert for special cases. Devin had helped me recover a crashed hard drive back in college. Now I needed something more. I want full covert surveillance installed in Vivian's Sedona estate, I said over the phone. Cameras, audio, network monitoring, everything. You want someone to think they're in control. Exactly. Devin laughed. Sounds like a chess game. I'm in. 1 week later, everything was in place. The largest bedroom in the estate, one my grandmother never let my mother step into, had been cleaned and perfectly redecorated. Silk sheets, a safe rigged with a hidden camera, a laptop on the desk, loaded with fake financial files, all encrypted, monitored for behavior. Every mouse click, every sent email, would stream straight to my computer. I asked Keller to accidentally let a staff member overhear that I was considering splitting the inheritance if my mother came back to negotiate. The perfect bait. Less than 48 hours later, Keller called back. She booked a flight from Chiang Mai to New York, departures tomorrow night. I hung up, heart calmed. For the first time in years, I wasn't afraid of Susan. I was waiting for her. The next afternoon, Tiffany picked me up at the Flagstaff airport to prepare for our guest. In the car, she handed me her phone. She just emailed from Susan Scott. Subject, about the inheritance. Message, Dearest Evelyn, I know there have been many misunderstandings. I think we should talk as a family. Nothing is more important than family. I'm on my way home. Hope you understand. I handed the phone back to Tiffany with a soft laugh. It's starting. That evening, I met her at the gate of the estate. Susan stepped out of a rented SUV, still wearing a wine-colored silk dress, designer sunglasses, and that perfectly fake smile that made my skin crawl. Evelyn, sweetheart? She spread her arms for a hug. I tilted away, gently dodging. If you want to talk, then come inside. She blinked, then forced a smile. I led her to the special room. Her eyes lit up the moment she saw the safe, the laptop, the designer dress hanging in the closet. Is this my room? Temporarily, if you'd like to stay, I said, voice light as air but devoid of emotion. As she stepped into the room, I stayed at the door watching my phone screen. The live feed from the hidden camera had just started rolling. Within 5 minutes, she was trying to open the safe. No luck. Then she moved to the laptop. The screen lit up. She started reading through each fake document, each fabricated investment spreadsheet I had created to lure her in. Tiffany stood next to me, arms crossed. It's on. You ready for the final round? I nodded. This time, I'll let her sink herself with her own greed. I knew she wouldn't be able to resist, not just because she was greedy, but because she believed she was smarter than everyone. Smarter than the lawyers, smarter than me, even smarter than Vivian herself. For someone like her, a room full of opportunity was no different from bait dangled in front of a shark. At night, I sat in the study, eyes fixed on the monitor. The entire feed from the surveillance cameras in the guest suite Vivian's old bedroom was streaming directly to Devon's system. Susan stood in front of the safe. She was wearing an ivory satin nightgown, holding a glass of red wine. Her gaze wasn't dreamy, it was calculating. She tried several passcodes, none worked. Instead of giving up, she sat down, pulled out her phone, and began taking photos of the safe from every angle. Tiffany peeked over my shoulder and whistled. Didn't take long. Patience was never her thing. I didn't answer. I was watching her eyes, scanning the room like a seasoned thief. The closet. Drawers. The framed pictures. 2 minutes later, Susan opened the laptop. Devon had preloaded it with treasures, forged financial reports, fabricated memos about secret investments and lists of undisclosed real estate, all designed to be just tempting enough for someone like her. And just as expected, her eyes lit up. She didn't just read. She downloaded. She took photos. She set passwords. She started sending emails. The first one went to someone called Russell Properties. Another name, Harper Group. The last one made my blood run cold. Mitchell L. Scott. Your cousin, right? Tiffany asked, her face pale. Yeah, I said. They were both sued in 2016 for investor fraud in Fort Worth. Devon, monitoring everything from the control center, sent a message. She's forwarding everything to her backup email, setting up Zoom meetings for investment talks. I've locked all attachments. She's taken the bait. The next morning, Susan walked into the kitchen, looking like she had reclaimed her status as a wealthy lady of the manor. Did you sleep well, Evelyn? She asked, pouring coffee like we were some perfect little family. I looked up from my iPad, offered a faint smile. Slept fine. You? Wonderful. That room is a dream. Vivian always had such exquisite tastes. I said nothing. She sat across from me, her eyes glinting with poorly hidden excitement. I think it's time we talk about the inheritance. I know you're a generous person. Of course, we'll talk after breakfast. I stood and left her with her steaming coffee. In my mind, only one line from Vivian echoed. Let her think she's winning until the trap snaps shut. That afternoon, Devon sent me the first audio recording from a Zoom call between Susan and a group of potential investors. Actually, Tiffany's associates in disguise will need to see original ownership documents for the hotel, one of them said, playing the investor role. I can assure you everything's legal. Evelyn's letting me handle the new investment deals. I'm her mother. I have influence. Her voice trembled slightly from excitement. That thrill. Not real power, but the illusion of control. I sent the recording to Keller. He called back in less than an hour. You have solid evidence. If you want, I can begin filing charges immediately. I looked out the window, the crimson sunset casting a warm glow over Vivian's garden. The scent of lavender still lingered in the air. Not yet, I said slowly. I want her to destroy her own reputation publicly. That's a rather ruthless tactic. I'm just using the lesson she taught me. That night, Susan went back into the room, this time with a handheld scanner. She scanned every single document, every page. Tiffany and I watched her every move on the screen. What do you think she'll do next? Tiffany asked. Set up a real investor call and get exposed in front of them all. I sipped my tea, eyes glued to the camera footage of my mother, the same woman who once left me penniless, now thrilled by a fake scheme designed solely to take her down. And strangely, I didn't feel triumphant, I just felt calm, because I would be the one to end it. The clink of glass echoed. Susan smiled, raising her wine glass in a toast to 3 men seated around the marble table, in the private dining room of Larkspur, an upscale restaurant in downtown Scottsdale. She wore a wine-red dress, full makeup, and the same pair of earrings I knew she had pawned for cash 2 years ago. Now she played the role of reborn businesswoman so well, she almost believed it herself. I sat 3 tables away at the bar, dressed in a plain business outfit, hair neatly tied up, eyes on the screen of my phone, streaming live footage from the camera embedded in Tiffany's shirt button. She sat across from Susan, posing as a promising investment liaison, flanked by her 2 associates, one playing a venture fund director, the other a supposed international investor from Singapore. I know you gentlemen are looking for exclusive investment opportunities, Susan said, her voice smooth as melted butter. The Maddox Hotel Group is preparing to expand westward. I hold the first rights of transfer from the heir, my daughter, Evelyn, but she's not interested in the business. I nearly laughed out loud. Not interested? Who did she think she was? Mother Teresa of capital markets? One of the investors spoke up. May we see the original contracts and asset certification? Susan smiled, and pulled out a folder, filled with the exact fake documents Devon and I had carefully created. All the numbers, stamps and signatures were there, but the dates and asset codes were deliberately wrong. Tiffany tapped her phone under the table. Signal received. I stood up. She was at the peak of her delusion, and I was about to bring her down. I walked toward the table, heels clicking loudly on the hardwood floor. Everyone turned to look. Susan froze, her face going pale like she'd just seen a ghost. Hello, Mother, I said clearly, stopping behind her. Funny running into you. Shemming here. She blinked rapidly, trying to compose herself. Evelyn, I was merely introducing an investment opportunity you weren't interested in. I tilted my head, pulled out my phone and connected it to the large screen behind the bar. Devin had hacked it earlier that afternoon. Oh, an opportunity? Then let's all take a look at the opportunity you've been working on. The screen lit up. Crystal clear footage showed Susan sneaking into Vivian's safe, covertly photographing documents, emailing files. Then came the recording of her phone call with Russell, a former partner once investigated for fraud, discussing how to liquidate assets quickly before Evelyn finds out. One of the investors shot up from his chair. What the hell is this? Susan's face went ghost white. Wait, this is a misunderstanding. It's just a confidentiality issue. I didn't know I was being recorded. That's right, you didn't know. I cut her off, because you thought you were smarter than everyone. But what you didn't know is that every single document you took was fake, designed to lure you into making a mistake. One of the fake investors looked so shocked he nearly spilled his water. She doesn't have legal ownership? I pulled out the original notarized copy of the will and laid it on the table. And the sole heir? My mother, Susan Scott, was excluded from the will. And this, I tapped the paper, is evidence that she tried to defraud you, to claim assets that aren't hers. The room turned heavy with silence. Susan stepped back, her hands trembling. You set me up. I stared straight into her eyes, cold and clear. No, you walked into your own trap. You taught me how to survive. Now I'm returning the lesson, only a lot more kindly. Tiffany stood and gently guided our two investment partners toward the exit. One of them muttered, if we get another call from her, we're reporting it to the police. Susan collapsed into her chair. I pulled out my phone and started recording again. A copy of this will go to the authorities, you know that. But if you want to avoid criminal charges, you'll listen to my terms. She choked back a sob, voice hoarse. Evelyn, I have nowhere to go. You're wrong, I said, pulling out a plane ticket and a key to an apartment in Montana. I already made arrangements. She stared at me, truly stared. For the first time without deception, without makeup, just a broken woman laid bare in front of everyone. Her face swelled like she was about to cry. What are you going to do with me? Nothing. Just let you live like a normal person. Like the ones you once hurt. I turned and walked away. Behind me, I heard the sound of a wine glass hitting the floor, shattering into pieces. My office is on the 12th floor, overlooking downtown Scottsdale to the west, where the sunset usually bleeds red across the glass. That afternoon, Susan sat across from me in that very room. Silent. No silk dress. No heavy makeup. She wore a long ash-gray coat. Her hair was messy, lips dry, eyes hollow like she'd just stepped out of a storm. I opened a drawer and placed two envelopes on the desk. One is a plane ticket to Billings, Montana. Inside, there's also a key to a prepaid apartment for 6 months, a part-time job at a small coffee shop, and a $15,000 balance to help you live decently. Susan frowned, suspicion flickering in her eyes. And the other one? I slid the second envelope toward her. It was thicker. Evidence, videos, emails, audio recordings, copies of the fake documents you used to scam investors. Mitchell's statement. If I send this to the police, there won't be a plane ride, just an interrogation room. Susan let out a sharp laugh, like a blade being unsheathed. You really think I'll believe this? That you're just giving me a chance to make things right? After everything? I leaned back, locking eyes with her. I don't need you to believe it. I need you to choose. She stared at me for a long moment, then lowered her head, fingers clasped so tightly they turned white. I'll return the money in the safe. I never meant to run forever. I thought you'd never understand. You always looked at me like I was some kind of failure. You stole my money. You disappeared. You pretended to feel remorse, then came back to steal again. How did you expect me to look at you? Like a victim? I opened the second file and pulled out a printout of the email Susan had sent to Russell. Evelyn is weak. She won't do anything. It's all in my hands now. I tossed the printout onto the table. Susan didn't laugh anymore. Her face twisted like it was being pulled by wires. You're getting revenge. No, I said. I'm ending it. Ending the cycle of lies, debt, and manipulation. I used to hope you'd change, but I don't anymore. I just want you gone from my life. She took a deep breath. A long silence followed, broken only by the ticking clock on the wall. Where the hell is Montana anyway? Far enough, I replied. Far enough that you won't ruin anyone else. There's snow. A little coffee shop. Someone who'll hire you to wipe tables and serve waffles. A place where no one knows who Susan Scott is. Susan looked at the two envelopes on the table as if each held a blade. Her hand trembled as she reached for the plane ticket, pulling it out. And if I don't go? I unlocked my phone and slid my finger across the screen. Ready to email the Maricopa County Sheriff. You already know the answer. A single tear rolled down her cheek. For the first time, I didn't see it as a weapon. It looked real, lonely. I could have had everything, but instead you chose deceit, over and over again. I cut in. And I chose to let go. Susan stood and took the ticket. Her face was bare, her eyes stripped of illusion. Are you really sending me away? No. You walked out of my life a long time ago. I'm just opening the door for you to finish the exit. She turned and walked to the door. Before opening it, she glanced back. Her eyes were no longer sharp, just a dull, gray sadness. You really are Vivian's granddaughter. I nodded. She taught me that sometimes, offering a final chance isn't about whether they deserve it. It's about whether you need to close the chapter. Susan nodded, her lips moving as if to say something, but no words came. Then she stepped out of the office, closing the door behind her like sealing off a rotting era I had been trapped in for far too long. I exhaled for the first time in months deeply. Tiffany walked in a few minutes later, placing 2 glasses of wine on the table. She gone, yeah. You okay? I picked up my glass, swirled it gently. Not sure, but at least now, I can start writing the next part of my story without having to erase someone else's mistakes first. 3 months after Susan left, I stood in my office, staring at the freshly stamped file. The Maddox Fund, Restitution for Financial Fraud Victims. It wasn't a flashy name. Not a shiny PR campaign. But it mattered to me, and to the dozens of people who had been scammed by my mother, Susan Scott, over nearly 2 decades. Heller and I had worked day and night combing through old files, small lawsuits that had been buried, victims who couldn't afford to keep fighting, investments that had never returned a cent. I couldn't undo what she'd done, but I could offer some justice to those who had trusted the wrong person. The fund began sending out modest checks, $2,000, $5,000, then $10,000, each one with a handwritten letter of apology from me, not on her behalf, but on behalf of the children who had to carry the names of liars. Tiffany once told me, back when I was doubting if this effort would make any difference, "You can't clean up everything she did, but you can stop it from spreading." I didn't respond, but I never forgot those words. I still kept quiet tabs on my mother. Not out of hate. Not hoping for redemption. Just to know. To know that Susan Scott had truly stopped. Through a friend of Keller's in Billings, I learned she had kept her word. No scandals. No shady loans. No high-risk ventures. She lived in the prepaid apartment, a modest older building but warm enough. Worked part-time as a server at a small cafe called Morning Rise. No one there knew she once wore Versace gowns to con Texas businessmen or forged fake property deeds to pressure people into investing in hotels that never existed. She was just Sue, the gray-haired woman who brewed her coffee too strong and always wiped tables more thoroughly than necessary. One January morning, with a thin blanket of snow covering the rooftops of the small Montana town, I drove to Morning Rise. I didn't call ahead. I wasn't even sure why I came. I just knew it was time. The doorbell chimed as I walked in. The space was warm, the air scented with waffles and cinnamon. She was behind the counter wearing a dark blue apron, hair tied back. She turned, reaching for a cloth to wipe the table, then froze. Our eyes met. I saw her stiffen slightly, her hand trembling. "Evelyn?" I gave a small nod. No hug, no tears, no forgiveness. Just a look, real and unfiltered. I sat at the counter. "Black coffee? No sugar." She quietly poured the coffee, said nothing. I reached into my coat pocket and placed a small box on the counter. Mahogany wood, lined with deep blue velvet. She opened it. Inside was an old silver mirror with ornate carvings, the keepsake from Vivian that I'd held onto. She reached out to touch the edge, then pulled her hand back as if the memory had burned. "I thought you kept this," she whispered. "Now it's your turn to have it," I said. "Not to look at your reflection, but to see yourself." She looked up, her lips parted as if to speak, but I held up my hand. I didn't come for explanations, and not to forgive, either. But I figured if I could start over from the wreckage you left behind, then maybe you deserve a chance too. Her face changed. No defenses. No performance. Just a tired woman worn down by years of heavy masks. "Thank you for not calling the police." I looked at her calm and steady. "I didn't, because I didn't want to become your reflection." She gripped the mirror tightly, eyes glistening. But no tears fell. "Will you ever come back?" I stood, grabbed my coat. Outside the window, snow drifted softly. "Maybe," I said, with no promise, "where you can really see yourself in that mirror. Not the shadow, but the person who can still change." I walked out. The doorbell chimed once more as the door closed behind me. I didn't look back. But I knew. She was watching, holding the silver mirror in her hands. Maybe she'd never change completely. Maybe she'd fail again. But that day, in the faded winter light, I saw her. Not as a con artist, not as a ghost of the past, but as a person trying to find whatever good was left. And as Vivian once said, redemption doesn't start with an apology. It starts with action, repeated every single day. I left Montana without a goodbye. But for the first time in my life, I didn't need a perfect ending. Just an honest beginning. Evelyn's story reminds us that sometimes the people who hurt us most deeply are the ones closest to us by blood. But through betrayal and pain, she chose justice over revenge, healing over repeating the cycle. In real life, not everyone will change, but we always have the power to choose our response. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It means freeing ourselves. And sometimes the strongest thing we can do is let go at the right time. What do you think about Evelyn's journey and her final choice? Do you believe Susan can truly change? Share your thoughts below, and don't forget to follow the channel for more powerful, real-life stories and lessons about family.